The helicopter's rotors cut through the thick Afghan air like a mechanical heartbeat, steady and reassuring until the moment everything went wrong. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos pressed her back against the cold metal wall of the CH-47 Chinook, watching the landscape below blur past in shades of brown and dust. The mission briefing had been clear: extract intelligence from a Taliban compound. Get in fast, get out faster. Maria had done this dance before. 12 deployments across Iraq and Afghanistan had taught her that no mission ever went exactly according to plan, but her job as a communications specialist was to make sure the team stayed connected no matter what happened. The radio equipment strapped to her back felt heavier than usual today, though she couldn't explain why. 5 minutes out, the pilot's voice crackled through her headset. Around her, the 8-man special operations team began their final equipment checks. These weren't regular infantry soldiers. They were the kind of operators who moved like shadows and spoke in whispers, each one a specialist in their own deadly craft. Team leader Captain Jake Morrison caught her eye and gave a thumbs up. At 32, Morrison had the kind of weathered face that comes from too many missions in too many dangerous places, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had kept his teams alive through impossible situations. Maria had worked with him twice before, and she trusted him completely. The compound they were hitting sat in a valley surrounded by rocky hills, isolated enough that the Taliban thought it was safe from American raids. Intelligence suggested it housed a high-value target, someone with information about planned attacks on coalition forces. The mission was supposed to be surgical: fast rope in, secure the target, extract within 15 minutes. Maria felt the helicopter begin its descent, her stomach dropping as they came in low and fast. Through the small window, she could see the mud brick walls of the compound growing larger. Everything looked quiet, too quiet for a place that was supposed to house active Taliban fighters. "Something feels off," muttered Sergeant First Class Tony Rodriguez, the team's explosive ordnance specialist. He was a compact man with nervous energy who could defuse a bomb while under fire, but had an almost supernatural ability to sense trouble before it started. "Intel says minimal resistance," Morrison replied through the comm, but Maria could hear the doubt in his voice. Good leaders always questioned intelligence reports, especially when they seemed too good to be true. The helicopter flared hard, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and debris. Before the wheels even touched the ground, the team was moving. Maria followed Rodriguez out the side door, her equipment bouncing against her back as she hit the rocky ground running. The plan called for a textbook clearing operation. 2 teams would breach the compound from different directions while Maria established a communication post in the helicopter's shadow. She set up her gear with practiced efficiency, extending the antenna and running diagnostics on the radio system that would keep them connected to base. "Overwatch, this is Reaper Team. We are on the ground and moving to target." Morrison's voice came through clear and professional. "Copy, Reaper Team. You are cleared hot," came the reply from the operations center back at base. Maria watched through her night vision scope as the green figures of Morrison's team approached the compound walls. Everything was proceeding according to plan until Rodriguez's voice cut through the radio chatter with 2 words that changed everything. "Contact front." The night exploded into chaos. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like deadly fireworks as Taliban fighters emerged from hidden positions throughout the compound. What intelligence had called a lightly defended target turned into a carefully planned ambush. "We've got fighters in the surrounding hills," called out Specialist Davis, the team's designated marksman. "They've got us surrounded." Maria's training kicked in automatically. She began coordinating fire support, calling for helicopter gunships, while simultaneously trying to raise additional ground units. The radio chatter became a symphony of controlled chaos as the team fought to break contact and reach the extraction point. "Reaper Team, this is Overwatch. We're reading multiple heat signatures converging on your position. Recommend immediate extraction." But extraction wasn't going to be simple. The helicopter pilot's voice came through tense and urgent, taking heavy fire from multiple directions. "Cannot maintain position for pickup." Through her scope, Maria watched Morrison's team laying down covering fire as they bounded from position to position, trying to reach the landing zone. The Taliban fighters had chosen their ambush site well, with overlapping fields of fire that made movement across open ground nearly impossible. "Rodriguez is hit," came Morrison's voice, tight with controlled anger. "Need immediate medical evacuation." Maria felt her heart sink. Rodriguez wasn't just a teammate. He was a friend who had saved her life in Fallujah 3 years earlier. She could hear the pain in his voice as he continued calling out enemy positions despite his wounds. The helicopter tried 3 times to land for extraction, but each attempt was driven off by increasingly heavy fire. Taliban fighters were moving in from all directions, turning what should have been a quick raid into a desperate fighting retreat. "Overwatch, we need to move to alternate extraction site," Morrison called. "Primary LZ is too hot." The alternate landing zone was 2 kilometers away across terrain that offered little cover. It would mean leaving the relative safety of the compound area and moving through open ground under fire. But staying put meant eventual encirclement and capture or death. "Moving in 30 seconds, Morrison announced. "Santos, stay close to Rodriguez. He's going to need help moving." Maria shouldered her radio pack and moved to Rodriguez's position. The explosive specialist had taken shrapnel in his left leg and was bleeding badly, but his eyes were still sharp and focused. "Don't worry about me," he said through gritted teeth. "Just keep us talking to base." The team began moving in a tactical column with Maria, helping support Rodriguez. Every 100 meters they would stop, establish security, and continue forward. The Taliban fighters were following, using the darkness and their knowledge of the terrain to maintain pressure without exposing themselves to concentrated fire. Movement to the east called Davis from his overwatch position. Multiple fighters moving parallel to our route. The enemy was trying to get ahead of them, to establish another ambush at the alternate extraction site. Morrison made a split-second decision that would prove crucial. Instead of continuing directly to the landing zone, he ordered the team to move north into the Rocky Hills. "We'll use the high ground," he explained over the radio. "Force them to come at us uphill." It was a sound tactical decision, but it meant abandoning the planned extraction timeline. They were now committed to a fighting withdrawal through hostile territory with limited ammunition and a wounded teammate. The climb into the hills was brutal. Rodriguez's condition was worsening, and Maria found herself practically carrying him up the steeper sections while trying to maintain radio contact with base. The weight of her equipment and the stress of combat were taking their toll, but she forced herself to focus on the immediate task of keeping the team connected to outside support. "Reaper team, this is Paladin 6, came a new voice over the radio. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chun, the battalion commander, was personally monitoring their situation. "We're launching a quick reaction force to your location. Hold position and mark your location with infrared strobe." But before Maria could respond, disaster struck. A Taliban rocket-propelled grenade exploded against the rocks near their position, showering the team with debris and temporarily disrupting all communications. When the ringing in Maria's ears subsided, she found herself separated from the rest of the team by a small rockfall. "Morrison, Rodriguez, anyone copy?" she called into her radio, but got only static in response. She could hear gunfire continuing from somewhere above her position, but couldn't see any of her teammates in the darkness. Maria was alone in enemy territory with a damaged radio and Taliban fighters closing in from multiple directions. Everything she had learned in survival training told her to find cover and wait for rescue, but her loyalty to her team demanded action. Rodriguez was wounded and needed medical attention that only the extraction helicopter could provide. She began working frantically to repair her radio equipment, using techniques learned in military communications school and improvised solutions born of desperation. The primary antenna had been damaged by shrapnel, but she managed to jury-rig a replacement using wire from her equipment pack. After 20 agonizing minutes, she managed to establish weak contact with base. "Overwatch, this is Santos. I am separated from Reaper team and need immediate assistance." The response came back broken and hard to understand. "Santos, copy. QRF minutes hold." Maria realized that her teammates had continued the rocky terrain cut into Maria's hands as she climbed through the darkness, following the distant sound of gunfire that marked her team's position. Each step had to be calculated and silent, because somewhere below her, Taliban fighters were tracking the same sounds, moving through terrain they knew like their own homes. Her radio crackled with brief transmissions from the ongoing firefight. Morrison's voice came through in fragments. Taking fire from the north. Rodriguez needs extraction in 10 minutes, or the signal cut out, leaving Maria with the terrible knowledge that her wounded teammate was running out of time. She pressed herself against a boulder and tried to boost the radio's signal by adjusting the improvised antenna, but the damage was too extensive for a perfect fix. Any Reaper element. This is Santos, she transmitted, keeping her voice low. I am approximately 400 meters southeast of your position and climbing. Rodriguez's medical status, over. Static answered her, but she thought she heard Morrison trying to respond. The radio equipment that had been her lifeline throughout countless missions was now failing her when she needed it most. Maria had grown up fixing things. Her father ran a small engine repair shop in Laredo, Texas, and she had learned early that every machine had its own personality and problems. Military radios were just more expensive versions of the same basic concept. Electronic components that could be coaxed into working with the right combination of knowledge and stubbornness. She pulled out her survival kit and began stripping wire to create a better antenna connection. The Taliban fighters below were getting closer. She could hear their voices echoing off the rocky walls as they coordinated their search. They knew Americans were trapped in the hills above them, and they were methodically working their way up to eliminate the threat. The work was delicate and had to be done by feel in the darkness. One wrong move would destroy the radio completely and leave her with no way to communicate with her team or guide rescue forces to their location. But taking too long would allow the enemy to surround her position. As she worked, Maria's mind drifted to the conversation she had with Rodriguez before the mission. He had shown her pictures of his daughter's upcoming quinceañera, talking about how proud he was that she had been accepted to college. First one in our family, he had said with obvious pride. Going to study engineering, just like her old man, but with better job prospects. Now Rodriguez was bleeding somewhere in the darkness above her, and Maria was the only person in position to coordinate his medical evacuation. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like a physical burden, but it also gave her strength. She had a mission, and mission completion had always been her specialty. The radio came back to life with a stronger signal as her improvised repairs took hold. She immediately tried to contact her team. Reaper team, this is Santos. Radio check, how copy? Morrison's voice came back clear and urgent. Santos, where are you? We thought you were Kia. Rodriguez is in bad shape. We need that medevac now. I'm climbing to your position, Maria responded. What's your status on ammunition and enemy contact? Running low on everything, Morrison replied. Enemy is probing our perimeter from multiple directions. They're trying to wait us out. Maria understood the tactical situation immediately. Her team had found a defensive position that was difficult to assault directly, but they were trapped there with limited supplies and a wounded teammate who needed immediate medical attention. The Taliban fighters had time on their side and local knowledge of the terrain. I can guide the QRF to your location, she transmitted, but I need precise coordinates and current enemy dispositions. Morrison began relaying information while Maria plotted the situation on her tactical map. The team had taken position in a cluster of large boulders that provided good cover but limited escape routes. Taliban fighters controlled the approaches from the east and south, while the western slope was too steep for safe movement with a wounded man. QRF is 15 minutes out, Morrison continued. But they're going to need a clear landing zone, and every piece of flat ground down there is covered by enemy fire. Maria studied her map and realized there was a solution, but it would require her to move through enemy-controlled territory to reach a position where she could mark a safe landing zone. It was exactly the kind of calculated risk that had gotten her promoted through the ranks despite being a communications specialist rather than an infantry soldier. I can reach the northern ridge, she told Morrison. From there I can mark an LZ and provide overwatch for the extraction. Negative, Santos. Too dangerous for solo movement through that terrain. But Maria was already moving, climbing through the rocks toward the ridge line that would give her a commanding view of the valley below. She knew Morrison was right about the danger, but she also knew that without her guidance, the helicopter would be flying blind into a shooting gallery. The climb took 25 minutes of careful movement through terrain that seemed designed to twist ankles and tear equipment. Twice, she had to freeze in place as Taliban patrol groups passed below her position, their voices carrying clearly in the thin mountain air. When she finally reached the ridge, Maria had a perfect view of the tactical situation. Her team's position was clearly visible, surrounded by muzzle flashes from enemy positions that formed a rough semicircle around their defensive perimeter. Below in the valley, she could see movement as more Taliban fighters moved into position. But she could also see something Morrison couldn't from his lower vantage point. A flat area about 600 meters north of the team's position that would be perfect for helicopter landing. It was currently empty of enemy fighters, probably because it seemed too far from the action to be tactically relevant. Reaper team, this is Santos. I have eyes on a viable LZ, but we'll need to suppress enemy positions to allow helicopter approach. Copy, Santos. QRF reports 5 minutes out. What do you need from us? Maria began coordinating the most complex operation of her military career. Using her radio, she would guide Morrison's team in laying down covering fire to clear the landing zone, while simultaneously talking the incoming helicopters through their approach to avoid enemy positions. On my mark, concentrate fire on the positions to your east, she instructed. That will draw their attention away from the northern approach. The sound of intensified gunfire echoed through the valley as Morrison's team executed her instructions. Maria watched through her scope as Taliban fighters repositioned to deal with the renewed threat, leaving the northern approach temporarily undefended. QRF, this is Santos. I am marking the LZ with infrared strobe now. Approach from the north. You will have approximately 90 seconds before enemy repositions to cover that avenue. The helicopters appeared as distant dots against the star-filled sky, growing rapidly larger as they approached at high speed and low altitude. Maria could see the lead aircraft's searchlight beginning to sweep the valley, looking for the landing zone she had marked. But the Taliban fighters had spotted the helicopters too. Tracers began reaching up toward the aircraft like deadly fireworks, and Maria realized the enemy had positioned anti-aircraft weapons in the surrounding hills. QRF, break left now, she called into her radio. Heavy weapons fire from your 3 o'clock position. The lead helicopter jinked hard to avoid a rocket-propelled grenade that passed close enough to rock the aircraft with its blast wave. The pilot's voice came back tense, but professional. Santos, we need that LZ clear of hostiles for safe landing. Maria made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone who knew her as a communications specialist rather than an infantry soldier. She began moving down from the ridge toward the landing zone, using her rifle to engage Taliban fighters who were repositioning to threaten the helicopter approach. Her marksmanship training, learned on the ranges of Fort Gordon, proved adequate for the engagement distances she faced. 2 Taliban fighters fell to her accurate rifle fire before the others realized they were being engaged from an unexpected direction. Landing zone is clear, she transmitted. Execute extraction now. The helicopter flared hard and touched down in a cloud of dust and rotor wash. Maria could see Morrison's team moving toward the aircraft with Rodriguez being carried between 2 operators. They were going to make it. But the Taliban fighters weren't finished. A coordinated assault began from multiple directions, designed to overwhelm the extraction site before the helicopter could lift off. Maria found herself in the position of providing overwatch for her team's retreat while being simultaneously hunted by enemy forces who had finally located her position. Santos, get to the bird now. Morrison's voice carried clearly over the sound of gunfire and helicopter engines. But Maria could see what Morrison couldn't. A Taliban team with an RPG moving into position for a shot at the helicopter. If they reached their firing position, they would destroy the aircraft and kill everyone aboard. Instead of running for the helicopter, Maria turned toward the enemy team. Her rifle was down to its last magazine, but she had enough ammunition for what needed to be done. She moved quickly through the rocks, using cover and concealment to get within effective range. The Taliban team was focused on their target, not expecting to be engaged by a lone American soldier moving through terrain they considered secure. Maria's first shots dropped two fighters before the others realized they were under attack. The brief firefight that followed lasted less. The sound of vehicle engines growing closer snapped Maria back to the immediate reality of her situation. She was alone on a mountainside in Afghanistan with no ammunition, limited water, and Taliban fighters converging on her position from every direction. The successful extraction of her team felt like a lifetime ago, though only 20 minutes had passed since the helicopter disappeared over the ridge. Maria forced herself to think like the survival instructor who had trained her at Fort Bragg. Your mind is your most important weapon, Sergeant First Class Peterson had drilled into every student. Everything else is just tools. Keep your mind sharp and focused, and you can survive anything. She began moving immediately, knowing that staying in one place would allow the enemy to surround her position. Her direction of travel had to balance several factors: avoiding enemy search teams, moving toward friendly territory, and maintaining radio contact with rescue forces. The radio gave her hope and frustration in equal measure. Every few minutes, she could catch fragments of transmissions from the Search and Rescue Coordination Center, but the signal was too weak and broken to establish reliable two-way communication. She knew rescue teams were looking for her, but she couldn't tell them exactly where she was or what kind of help she needed. Moving through the rocky terrain in darkness required all of her concentration. One twisted ankle or noisy mistake could mean capture or death. She used techniques learned in night movement training, testing each step carefully and pausing frequently to listen for sounds of pursuit. Behind her, she could hear the Taliban search teams spreading out across the mountainside. They were being systematic about it, using local knowledge of the terrain to cover all the likely escape routes. Worse, she could hear them talking on handheld radios, coordinating their search pattern like a professional military unit. These weren't untrained village fighters. They were experienced insurgents who had been fighting American forces for years and knew exactly how to track an isolated soldier through difficult terrain. They had time, local knowledge, and superior numbers. Maria had training, determination, and the desperate motivation of someone fighting for their life. After an hour of careful movement, she found a defensive position among a cluster of boulders that offered good concealment and multiple escape routes. She settled in to work on her radio, knowing that communication with rescue forces was her only real hope of survival. The damaged antenna could be improved with better materials, but everything had to be done by touch in complete darkness. Using wire from her equipment harness and metal fragments from shrapnel damage, she carefully rebuilt the antenna connections to boost signal strength. Any station, this is Santos, she transmitted when the work was complete. I am alive and mobile, requesting immediate extraction. Over. This time the response came back stronger. Santos, this is Paladin 6. We have multiple assets searching for your location. Can you provide coordinates? Colonel Chin's voice was like hearing from home. Maria quickly consulted her GPS unit and provided her grid coordinates, but even as she spoke, she could hear vehicle sounds getting closer to her position. Paladin 6, I have enemy vehicles approaching from multiple directions. May need to relocate before extraction can be attempted. Copy, Santos. We're tracking your radio signal, but extraction will be difficult in that terrain. Can you move to more open ground? Maria studied her tactical map by the dim light of her GPS screen. The nearest open area suitable for helicopter landing was 3 kilometers away across terrain that was certainly under enemy observation. Moving there would mean crossing roads, open areas, and at least 2 villages where Taliban supporters could spot her easily. But staying in the mountains meant playing a game of hide and seek with hunters who knew every cave and trail in the region. Eventually, they would find her, and when they did, she would be trapped with no way to fight back. I'll move toward Grid 41 SQE 12345 67890, she transmitted, giving coordinates for an area that offered the best compromise between accessibility for rescue forces and defensible terrain for her to hide in. Santos, that's going to put you very close to known enemy positions, Colonel Chin replied. Are you sure you can make it there safely? Maria looked around at the rocky landscape that was slowly filling with enemy searchers and made the decision that would define the rest of her life. Ma'am, staying here isn't safe either. I'm going to move now while I still have darkness for concealment. She began the most dangerous journey of her military career, moving through terrain where every shadow could hide an enemy fighter and every sound could give away her position. The weight of her radio equipment made noise discipline difficult, but abandoning it would mean losing her only connection to rescue forces. The first obstacle was a narrow valley where a Taliban checkpoint controlled the main road. Maria could see vehicle headlights and hear voices as fighters questioned local civilians about any unusual activity. She would have to cross that road to reach her destination, but doing it undetected would require perfect timing and a lot of luck. She studied the guard patterns for 30 minutes, learning their routine and identifying the brief windows when the road was not under direct observation. When her moment came, she moved like a ghost across the open ground, using a drainage ditch to stay below the sight line of the guards. On the far side of the road, the terrain changed to agricultural fields that offered less concealment but better mobility. Maria moved through irrigation ditches and along field boundaries, staying away from buildings where dogs might detect her scent and raise an alarm. It was in these fields that she had her closest call with capture. A Taliban patrol came around a corner just as she was crossing between two compounds, and for a moment she was silhouetted against the starlit sky with nowhere to hide. Maria dropped flat and froze, praying that the patrol leader's night vision wasn't good enough to distinguish her shape from the rocks and shadows around her. The patrol stopped less than 50 meters away, and she could hear them discussing whether they had seen movement. For 10 minutes, she lay motionless while the patrol searched the immediate area. One fighter passed close enough that she could have touched his boots, but the darkness and her field uniform's camouflage pattern kept her invisible. When they finally moved on, she was soaked in sweat despite the cool mountain air. The incident reminded her that she was operating in enemy territory where even the smallest mistake could be fatal. But it also demonstrated that her training and equipment were adequate for the challenge she faced. She could do this. 2 hours before dawn, Maria reached the rally point she had designated for extraction. It was a small plateau surrounded by rocky hills, defensible but accessible to helicopters. More importantly, it was far enough from major roads and villages that rescue aircraft could approach without immediately drawing ground fire. She established a concealed observation post and began working to improve her radio communications with the Rescue Coordination Center. The new position offered better line of sight to distant radio towers, and her signal strength improved dramatically. Paladin 6, this is Santos. I am in position at the designated coordinates and ready for extraction. Santos, we have a recovery team en route to your position. Estimate arrival in 45 minutes. What is your current status? Maria took inventory of her situation. She had no ammunition, limited water, and her food had been lost somewhere during the night's movement. But she was in a defensible position with good radio communications, and rescue was on the way. I am combat ineffective due to ammunition status, but uninjured and ready for pickup, she reported. Copy, Santos. Recovery team is call sign Guardian Angel, 2UH, 60 helicopters with security element. They will contact you directly when inbound. For the first time since being separated from her team, Maria allowed herself to believe she might actually survive. But she also knew that the next 45 minutes would be the most dangerous yet. Taliban search teams had been tracking her movement throughout the night, and they would converge on any location where American helicopters attempted to land. She used the waiting time to improve her position, arranging rocks to provide better cover and clearing sight lines for observation. If the Taliban found her before the helicopters arrived, she would at least make them fight for their victory. The eastern sky was beginning to show the first hints of dawn when her radio crackled with a new voice. Santos, this is Guardian Angel Lead. We are 10 minutes out from your position. Pop smoke to mark the landing zone. Maria threw her last smoke grenade into the center of the small plateau, and watched yellow smoke begin drifting across the rocky ground. In the distance, she could hear the distinctive sound of UH-60 rotors growing louder. But She could also hear something else. Vehicle engines racing up the mountain roads toward her position. The Taliban search teams had spotted the helicopters and were racing to reach the extraction site before the Americans could escape. Guardian Angel, this is Santos. Enemy vehicles approaching from the east and south. Estimate arrival at LZ in 5 minutes. Copy, Santos. We're coming in hot. Be ready to move fast. The helicopters appeared over the ridge, flying low and fast, their door gunners already scanning for targets. Maria could see muzzle flashes from Taliban fighters who had reached positions overlooking the plateau, and tracers began reaching up toward the incoming aircraft. The lead helicopter flared hard and touched down in the middle of the smoke, its rotors whipping the yellow cloud into a blinding whirlwind. Maria ran toward the aircraft as door gunners laid down suppressing fire on enemy positions. She was halfway to the helicopter when a Taliban fighter appeared from behind a boulder less than 30 meters away, raising an AK-47 to fire at the aircraft. Without ammunition for her own weapon, Maria did the only thing she could. She charged directly at him. The collision knocked both of them to the ground, and a desperate hand-to-hand fight followed. Maria used combatives training to control the rifle while the Taliban fighter tried to draw a knife from his equipment belt. They rolled across the rocky ground, each fighting for their life. The fight ended when a door gunner from the helicopter put 3 rounds center mass into the Taliban fighter. Maria rolled away from the body and sprinted for the aircraft as more enemy fighters appeared on the surrounding ridges. Strong hands pulled her into the helicopter as it lifted off under fire. She found herself lying on the cabin floor next to a medic who immediately began checking her for wounds. "Are you hit?" he shouted over the sound of rotors and gunfire. "No, I'm okay," Maria replied, though she was shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. As the helicopter climbed away from the extraction site, Maria looked down at the mountainside where she had spent the longest night of her life. Taliban fighters were still shooting at the departing aircraft, but their rounds were falling short. "Santos, this is Guardian Angel Lead," came the pilot's voice through her headset. "Welcome back to the world of the living. Your team is waiting for you at base." Maria closed her eyes and allowed herself to truly relax for the first time in 18 hours. She had been left behind in enemy territory, cut off from her unit with no ammunition and failing equipment. By any reasonable standard, she should have been captured or killed. Instead, she had not only survived but had coordinated the successful extraction of her wounded teammate and guided her own rescue through enemy-controlled territory. She had proven that training, determination, and refusal to quit could overcome impossible odds. When the helicopter landed at the forward operating base 30 minutes later, Maria was surprised to find Colonel Chun waiting for her personally along with Morrison and the rest of her team. Rodriguez was there too, bandaged but smiling, having been successfully treated for his wounds. "Outstanding work, Sergeant Santos," Colonel Chun said as Maria stepped off the aircraft. "Your actions tonight saved lives and demonstrated the finest traditions of the United States Army." Maria looked around at the faces of her teammates, people who were alive because she had refused to give up when everything went wrong. She thought about the long night in the mountains, the desperate radio calls, and the moment when she charged an armed enemy fighter with nothing but courage and determination. "Just doing my job, ma'am," she replied. But even as she said it, she knew that what had happened on that mountainside was far beyond any job description. It was the kind of heroism that emerges when training, courage, and unbreakable determination meet impossible circumstances. Later, as she sat in the debriefing room telling her story to intelligence officers who would analyze every detail of the night's events, Maria realized that she had discovered something important about herself. When everything was stripped away except the core of who she was, she had proven equal to any challenge. The girl from Laredo who had joined the army to escape limited opportunities had become a soldier who could accomplish the impossible when lives depended on her actions. That knowledge would stay with her for the rest of her military career and beyond, a foundation of confidence built on the mountain slopes of Afghanistan during the longest night of her life. Then 30 seconds, but it felt like hours. When it was over, 3 Taliban fighters were dead, and Maria was alone on the mountainside with an empty rifle and the sound of the helicopter lifting off in the distance. She had saved her team and ensured Rodriguez would receive the medical attention he needed. But she was now completely isolated in enemy territory with no ammunition and limited radio contact with friendly forces. Overwatch, this is Santos, she transmitted as she watched the helicopter disappear into the distance. Reaper team has been successfully extracted. I am remaining on station and require immediate pickup. The response came back broken and faint. Santos, copy your transmission. QRF is coordinates for pickup. The radio signal faded to static, leaving Maria alone on the mountainside with Taliban fighters converging on her position from multiple directions. She had accomplished her mission, but now faced the greatest challenge of her military career, surviving long enough for rescue forces to find her. In the distance, she could hear vehicles moving along the valley roads as enemy reinforcements arrived to join the search. They knew an American soldier was still alive in their territory, and they would not stop looking until they found her. Maria checked her equipment and began planning her next moves. She had survival training, fieldcraft skills, and an unshakable determination to make it home alive. Most importantly, she had proven to herself that she could accomplish the impossible when her teammates' lives depended on her actions. The night was far from over, and the real test of her survival skills was just beginning. But Staff Sergeant Maria Santos had already done the impossible once tonight. She was prepared to do it again, moving without her, probably assuming she was dead or captured. She was now completely alone in hostile territory, but she still had a job to do. Somewhere in the darkness above her, Rodriguez needed medical evacuation, and the quick reaction force needed accurate coordinates to find them. She began climbing toward the sound of gunfire, using skills learned in mountain warfare, training to move quietly through the rocky terrain. Every shadow could hide an enemy fighter. Every sound could signal her location to hostile forces tracking her movements. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had joined the army to escape a dead-end life in a small Texas town where opportunities were as scarce as rain. The military had given her purpose, training, and a chance to serve something bigger than herself. Now that service might cost her everything. As she climbed higher into the hills, Maria could hear her team's gunfight continuing somewhere ahead. They were still alive, still fighting, which meant there was still hope. But between her and her teammates lay unknown numbers of Taliban fighters who would kill or capture her without hesitation. She paused behind a large boulder to check her equipment and assess her situation. The radio was working, but signal strength was poor. Her ammunition was limited to what she carried for personal protection. Most importantly, she had no idea exactly where her team was located or how to reach them safely. But Maria Santos hadn't survived 12 deployments by giving up when things got difficult. She had earned her sergeant's stripes by solving problems under pressure and completing missions regardless of obstacles. Being left behind in enemy territory was just another problem to solve. She keyed her radio and spoke in the calm, professional voice that had guided countless operations through crisis. Any station, this is Santos. I am mobile and attempting to rejoin friendly forces. We'll continue to monitor this frequency. Then, she started climbing toward the sound of guns, carrying hope and determination up the mountainside one step at a time. Behind her, Taliban fighters were beginning their own ascent, tracking the American soldiers who had dared to enter their territory. The night was far from over, and Maria Santos was about to discover just how far her training, courage, and stubborn refusal to quit could carry her through the darkness. In the distance, the sound of helicopter rotors grew louder as the quick reaction force began their race to reach the isolated team before it was too late. But first, one communications specialist with a damaged radio and unbreakable determination had to survive long enough to guide them home. The battle for survival in the Afghan mountains was just beginning.